Hello, and welcome to NexgenMinds, the informal but informative weekly Sunday podcast made for students by students. I'm your host, Maddie Clark, and together we'll start a much-needed conversation with students, experts, and other special guests about mental health. We'll bust some myths, find out what are the best ways to manage our well-being, and if all things fail, we'll simply manifest our way to sanity. So in this week's podcast, I'm joined by Savannah Johnson, a 16-year-old student from Bradfield College, currently taking her A-levels in English literature, history of art and art. She has a passion for mental health, having set up her own movements such as the semicolon campaign and writing a letter to the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. She's hoping to study fashion design or fashion journalism at Central St Martin's, whilst also continuing to campaign for mental health awareness and make change. So, Savannah, it's so nice of you to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you about just everything that you're doing at the moment, and especially about schools and just also the importance of having young people's voices heard.
100%. I think that's something that I think is kind of overlooked a bit. Mental health can be talked about, but it needs to be talked about by the right people. And I think especially it's a difference having, adults and older people talking about young people's mental health, but it also has to come from the young people themselves for it to sort of make the changes that it needs.
Change cannot happen from the top down, it also has to come bottom up.
It has to come from the people that it's about. It's all well and good adults making these decisions, but it needs to come from the people who they affect and who they're kind of about and who they're gonna benefit, or in some cases kind of affect in a negative way. And I think that's something that's really important about young people using their voices to kind of stand up and say what they need and what they deserve. I've always had sort of this drive to change the way that mental health has kind of been spoken about, especially within my sort of circle of young people in schools. Ever since I sort of struggled with my mental health from the age of I think I first struggled when I was about 11, but I think it really sort of hit me when I moved to senior school, so about the age of 12 or 13. And I think the thing that I always found was this lack of conversation surrounding it. And this, again, the thing that I'll obviously talk about that I brought up in the letter about sort of the wait for services and just the lack of funding going into it and the lack of education in schools. And, you learn all these things when you're growing up in schools about how to do Pythagoras and how to do this, but you never really learn how to take care of your mental health and how to look, out for other people's mental health. And I think that's something that became really, really I became so aware of that as soon as I went to school, senior school, because I think when you're in, prep school or primary school, you don't really talk about it as much, and it's not really the age where it's kind of an issue in most people's lives. But I think going to senior school, I definitely noticed people around me, and I would sort of be thinking, I wonder if someone else feels like this, or I wonder if someone else is feeling the same thing, and I wonder if I should say something. But because it's never talked about, you kind of feel there's this big stigma around it, I don't want to say, I don't want to bring it up because they might think I'm weird or they might judge me. And I think that was something that I really found sort of hit me. I was quite shocked by this idea of just feeling like I was the only one who had ever felt like that. And I remember being sat in my Wellbeing lessons and thinking, why am I learning about all these things? Why am I learning about drugs and alcohol and having so much time on e-safety and not sending things that I will regret? Because, we know this, but why am I not being taught about what to do if I think I'm struggling, or what to do if I'm worried about a friend? And I think for so long it had been something that I'd kind of kept inside, and I'd been oh, this really bugs me, but I'd never really sort of consciously made any effort to kind of change it or address it. And then when I was in year 11, I think that's when I started to really realize something's got to change here. We've got to start talking about this, because it's just, I think I really realized the effect that not talking about it was actually having, on top of the existing problems that people are facing with their mental health. Not talking about it makes it just 10 times worse. And especially in a school environment, in lessons, and especially with Wellbeing, it was something that I really noticed. And when I first wanted to see a therapist, and I was referred to see a therapist, I remember being told, yeah, we've got a bit of a weight on our hands. And I just remember thinking, what is this about? I can't wait, this weight is, I remember thinking, this is weird. What is this weight for? Because, I was thinking, hold on, I can't wait that much longer. I need to speak to someone. And I remember it really bugging me, but I never really looked into it or thought that much of it. And after starting the Semicolon project, I think it became so much more of a passion for me to just research into these things and actually look into the sort of statistics. And I think especially with lockdown, that was what really that was when it was too much. And I was like, okay, I've got to do something about this now, after seeing especially just the complete rise in mental health problems and its sort of appearance in our society. I think I realized, especially in young people, oh my God, if we don't do something now, this is just not going to change. And I was like, I was thinking, I kind of said to my friends, like, I really want to write a letter. I really want to do something. And I was like, am I being too ambitious? Like, is this just going to be silly? And then I was like, no, because, every change has to start somewhere. And I thought, even if it gets seen by like a few people, or if it gets seen by just someone who might have the right connection, or just might be able to, send it to someone who might be able to make a small change, that will be something. And something is more than nothing, and that's what I think was like really important to me. So I then started doing my research, and I started researching into what funding was dedicated to mental health. And actually the most shocking thing was that when I was first working out sort of who was best to send it to, because I was like, do I send it straight to Boris, or which way do I go about it? And I went into the government website and I looked up like a mental health category, and there wasn't one. And I was like, what? So there were all these categories of like the ministers and how to contact them, and advice and things, and there wasn't like a specified category for mental health. And I was like, how is this? And I was like, every time the more research I did, it just highlighted even more this sort of lack of this lack of just awareness, resources. It's just presence. I mean, full stop, the presence of it. And the sort of, when I was going onto this website, I was thinking, this is the government and we don't even have a section for it, and it's like one of the most prominent things in our society. So I sort of got all my figures together, and I think for me it was something that had been sort of in my head for a long time. The letter itself didn't take long to write. It had been thoughts that had been in my head for such a long time. And again, when I was looking through this, like all the ministers, and I was thinking, why are all these people getting the right to make decisions on our behalf? And that was the thing that struck me the most, because I was also thinking, what can I do here that will actually make a change? Because I can highlight the fact that there's a lack of funding. I can highlight the fact that people are, struggling, and that the rate of mental illness and the appearance of it in our society is just growing. But what is that going to do? Because I know, people know that. So I was like, what can I do that, will actually make a change? And I was thinking, I think there needs to be some sort of link between us as the young people and these adults who are actually in the power to make the changes. And I was like, I wonder if I could be able to make that connection. And then I kind of came about this idea of having this sort of representative in the form of a young person to make these decisions about the sort of mental health, like rules and resources and support and funding. So I was like, you know what, I don't want to be a minister or, employed by Parliament. Like, that's not, I'm a 16-year-old, but just having that input from someone who actually knows what people need and what actually benefits people, I think just would make the world of difference. So I went about writing the letter, and I sort of just highlighted things, and I wanted to really just stress what was going on, because although I think, of course, the government are aware of like what's going on in young people's mental health, adults' mental health, but I think especially coming from a young person, it needed to be stressed even more. And I just wanted to highlight, so I sort of highlighted the funding and this lack of funding, and like some things that were just really shocking about the difference between funding into sort of, how much they're giving and how much they actually then put into the mental health resources and the services. And then I sort of proposed that I wanted to have a meeting, which I'm still awaiting and we will get eventually, to become sort of a correspondent between this sort of panel of these ministers, Prime Minister and the government, who are making these decisions regarding young mental health resources, young people's mental health services, and sort of the education surrounding it. And to be able to make that link between, especially with social media in our age as well, like being able to sort of reach out to people and know what people need through social media, not just my friends, but also just a wider circle of people. And then being able to have some sort of communication between me, the young people, and the government, to be like sort of a, I don't know, like a, what do you call this, lily pad, like a little middle point between us, to be able to just strengthen the services and the sort of resources and education that we are given, because it's not enough and it's not good enough. And I think that it's very easy for the government to sort of brush it under the carpet, because it's not them, it's adults, and they're sort of, they can focus on the bigger things that are, more apparent for their generation, or, you know, that they think hold more importance at the time. But I think you can't escape that when you've got a young person there who's asking on behalf of all young people to do better and to be better and to make better changes and to do things that will actually help us. And so that's kind of what I wanted to achieve. And I did not expect for it to have the sort of reaction that it did. I mean, I posted it thinking, well, yeah, I posted the physical letter to Downing Street, and I thought I'll post a copy on my Instagram, and just so that people can see that I've done this, and that maybe if a few people see it, it will give them a bit of hope that someone's trying to change something, and that, you know, there are other people who are struggling and who are seeing this lack of resources and funding and lack of support. And then it sort of just blew up, and I was like, oh my God, this wasn't, I was not expecting this. And then through, I guess, all the attention that it got, it did reach Alex George. Dr. Alex sort of saw it and got in contact with me, and sort of wants to have a meeting, which we're kind of in the process of arranging and finding the time for, in just correspondence with his manager, because obviously he's a very busy man, but to be able to see if we can kind of put our heads together. And because obviously he was recently appointed as youth mental health ambassador, so it's again having these connections with people who are speaking on behalf of and for young people with the government. And I think that's something that was really important. I really wanted to sort of include him in it so that we could sort of come together. So we're just kind of waiting to see what happens next.
It was absolutely, firstly, I enjoyed every single moment of that. And secondly, huge congratulations. Like, honestly, it's so empowering to see young people actually stand up, and there's so much more awareness that young people are actually kind of talking. We're talking, but we're talking among ourselves. 16-year-olds, you can't vote. There's no way of actually expressing our opinion, but the social media provides the perfect platform.
We'd all get our say, and we'd all be able to sort of say our bit about what we want to be done. But I thought if there's one person who could just be able to communicate that on behalf of everyone, and like collate ideas with other people and sort of combine it all and work out what actually can be done, and then sort of correspond with the government, that would just change things so drastically. And I don't think that it would change funding. That's got to come from, internally there. I don't think it would change things like that, but it's just this idea of them being aware of what actually needs to be done, doing things that will actually benefit us, not just ticking boxes, and actually taking into account the sort of views and the feelings and the effects that these rules and implications that they make are having on young people. And I think that was something that was just hugely crucial for me, just having the perspective of a young person, I think just will make the world of difference. And I won't stop until I get that meeting, until we sort of can make a change, because it needs to happen. And I really believe that when it does happen, it will make a positive change for so many people. And I also think for the government as well, it's important, because I think they need to have that perspective that they can't have. And that's not their own fault that they're not 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18, that's just how it is. But they need that perspective from someone else and from a wider community of people who these rules are sort of affecting and actually going to be having the impact on. And so that's sort of where the actual motivation came from, to try and make that change. And that's sort of where we are now. But it's not, these things aren't easy. I've got to keep campaigning. I'm sending out more letters. I won't stop sending the letters until I get a response, and I won't stop campaigning until a change is made. And that's just, these fights are hard, but I know that the more I fight and the harder I fight, we will get there in the end, and it will be so worth it when we can see the changes that we so desperately need actually being implicated and being made.
Please never stop. Keep on going, because you're also going to inspire so many more people to also join you.
It's all of us together. We have such power, and I think I saw that when the letter sort of was being reposted and everyone was sort of doing their bit to get it around. And I think we underestimate the power that as a generation we have. Like, if all of us come together, and this is something that all of us feel so passionate about, even if you haven't personally been affected by mental health, someone around you will have, a friend, a family member, someone in your close circle. And that's the thing that we all have in common. We all have a drive to do better and to make better, and to sort of work out what we can do as a generation to make better footsteps and make the footsteps of change for the future generations to come, so that our kids don't have to be having this struggle, and so that they can go and go to the doctors and just be free to talk about how they're doing, or just bring it up to friends and not even think twice about saying that they're struggling. And I think that's you know, we owe it to ourselves and to future generations to make those changes.
Absolutely. And talking about those changes, I want to delve into what your letter was actually about and all the changes that you want to see. So you're talking about that actually, when you can't change the funding, you can't change how much money is going into it, because I mean there's scarce resources, there's only so much money the government has, but it's also about putting them into the right policies. And I was doing a little bit of research on this, and there was, I think, only 2% of primary schools and something like 1% of secondary schools actually have published online policies concerning mental health, and only 56% of primary schools and only 44% of secondary schools actually provide some support for mental health. So it's questioning about, where is this funding going?
The thing I think it's no one's asking for you to invent £2 billion out of nowhere. That's not what we're asking of the government. We're asking for them to reconsider where this funding is going, because I did stress this in the letter, just this environment of school and teaching something in a school and in a safe environment from a young age, that's the crucial point. And teaching it in that environment, and again from the start of education, is so important, because that's how children grow up, knowing that it's okay and knowing what to do. And I think, I think back to, I know I talked about this a bit at the start, but I think back to my sort of wellbeing lessons and like, I count myself lucky with the sort of education we've had, because it has been talked about, but not nearly enough. Like, if I'm counting myself lucky and I still don't know enough about certain things, and through my own experiences, I would say I have quite like a deep understanding of mental health and sort of the effects that it can have, but I know from friends and through people around me that people do not know enough, and that's not their fault that they haven't. You can't expect people to know things when they haven't been taught it. It's like asking people to go and sit an exam in maths when they've never had lessons, because this is the problem, that people can't be expected to know how to be there for a friend or know how to reach out for help if they haven't been taught it. And the difference that would make for people to know where to go to, who to talk to, how to start the conversation, would be just immense. And that doesn't take money, that doesn't take more money, that takes a consideration of where that money goes and how to sort of filter it into the education. And that's something that it doesn't take a lot. It takes a conversation of reworking things and having a bit of a shuffle around, but I don't think they know that, because they don't have the perspective. And I think if they have that young person's perspective, that's what it comes back to, having the perspective of someone who this directly affects. That's when it will sort of become clear to them what needs to be done.
Absolutely. And you talked about incorporating mental health into the education system with like maybe PSHE lessons. Any other ideas that you want to bring up with Boris Johnson or Alex?
A dedicated time. I think, it's all well and good, covering it for a term in wellbeing or PSHE lessons, but I think that it needs to be more than that. It can't be something that can be covered for 4 weeks and then that's done, because it doesn't go away after 4 weeks. People's mental health doesn't, just increase after 4 weeks of learning, or it doesn't get better or worse. It doesn't work like that. And I think that, we have these times. Think about the times that we have that we could just spend, times where you're doing things and you're thinking, do I really need to learn this, or do I really need to be focusing on this? Or like assembly times when you're thinking, this is just not really, I don't need to be doing this right now, it's not really adding that much, where we could just substitute those sort of small periods of time that aren't really being utilized for anything really beneficial, and we could just spend a bit of time about, it's not necessarily even like education, like formal education, but just conversation, just sitting there and talking and just being able to learn to, I think people are actually so unaware of how to just start the conversation, how to react when people bring up mental health. I think that's a starting point to just even learn and just have a sort of period of time where you sit down and you just talk to your friends, you just talk and you just sort of check in on how people are doing. And I think it does also take one conversation to start so many, and that's the important thing, that someone leaves that conversation and then will feel so much more inspired and so much more comfortable and able to go and then start the conversation with someone else. And I just think we're not in a position yet where, as a generation and as a society, we're sort of educated enough to just go and start those conversations. I mean, obviously the people who have experienced things and who are maybe more educated will, but as a general society, we aren't in a position to just go and start the conversation about mental health, because we haven't been educated well enough to do that. And I think just having a time where we can talk about it and we can ask questions and we can just know it, not even like formal things like the definitions, but just generally how we are, how our well-being is, how our friends are, experiences, what people feel about certain things is just so crucial to starting that conversation.
Becomes almost like a checklist.
I think it should be like that. I don't think it should be we must teach this, this and this, because that's not, again, how mental health works. It doesn't work as a checklist. It's not the same. No one's story is the same. And I think you also have to be careful with the message that you imply by teaching it like it's an academic subject, because it's not, it's not a subject that can be taught. It's just something that needs to be talked about rather than taught. It just needs to be talked about, and that's enough. People learn through their experiences, people learn through conversation, and I think that's what I almost feel like the government sort of see it as, like, oh, we must then change the curriculum and change this, which yes will help, but I think just allowing time, dedicating time to talk will make so much more of a change than they actually think.
It's all very good and well just saying, oh, the government could advise schools to put X amount of time into talking about mental health or creating those conversations. But do you think it needs to be even stricter than that? Because it is really important.
We don't have options of going to a maths lesson. We don't have options of going to learn about English. That's something that is set by the government. That's how it is. We just know. And I think it has to be seen as just important as that, even more important, because, some people may go on to use maths for the rest of their life, and that's fine. But, some people, you leave school and you never think of it again. Mental health is not going to leave our lives ever. It's never going to not be important. And so it can't be something that is like a choice, because it's not a choice if we have mental health or not. The subject can't be a choice. It has to be talked about. There's no other way to go around it. There's no other way to make the change. And I think that is something but I also think that no one's going to want to decline an opportunity to talk about it, because I think people are all so desperate to talk about it. So if you put it in front of students and said, listen, we might have this time, as a suggestion, I would be so surprised at anyone who would be like, actually, I don't want that, because people are desperate to talk, but it's about starting it and knowing where to start and how to start. That is what sort of needs teaching and needs touching upon, because that's where we are sort of lacking in that sort of way of approaching the conversation and starting the conversation. So I think, it could be made compulsory by the government. And I think that would probably be the best way to do it, because then it can't go wrong. But I also think we have to remember that everyone needs to talk. Everyone needs to start the conversation. So I can't imagine anyone not wanting to take up that opportunity,
And it's about like normalizing the conversation, because like you said, like one little conversation, once that starts, then eventually it'll become like a whole circle and it'll keep on expanding. I also wanted to talk about your other project, Semicolon. That's the kind of idea behind it, is actually sharing your stories and creating that kind of safe space that you're not the only one that's going through things, that actually a lot of people are, and it's okay to talk about it. So I was just wondering if you could tell us about the project and why you created it.
Of course. So I guess for me, it started with, I had this idea of writing a book. And it was always kind of like when you have ideas and you're like, oh, I'd really love to do that. But I never really thought about, pursuing it. And I talked to my friends about it and I'd be like, I really want to write a book. Like, I feel like I had this drive to do something, to create something that was like a collection of something. And it wasn't just one, conversation. It was something that was there, solid, and it was there, and it could be read, and it could make a change, it could do something. And so in the first lockdown, I remember it must have been like maybe June time, I remember going for a walk with one of my best friends and being like, I really want to write this book. And I'd just been through quite a bad patch with my own mental health. And I remember thinking, God, I wish I just had something that was like a reminder, something to look at that was like other people that I could relate to, or, because you can talk to friends and you can see online people who are opening up about their struggles, maybe influencers, celebrities who have maybe made a post, but to have something all in one place and to sort of be able to read through, or just to be able to, when you're feeling alone and sort of isolated, to be able to be reminded that actually you're not the only person who's feeling like that. And I think more importantly, just than, knowing that someone else has felt like that someone else has felt like that and is still okay and has come through it and has made it through and is actually a stronger person because of it. And I think that's something that became really, really apparent to me, that I wanted to create this message. So I then sort of brainstormed ideas, and I came up with the idea of creating the book. And it started out as just I was going to sort of work on this book, and then I was like, I really think I want to do something more here than just, you know, just a book, because when I publish the book and when the book comes out, then I'm done, and I don't want to be done. I never want this to be done, you know, it's never going to be finished, you know, it has to keep going and it has to keep growing. And so I thought, I'm going to start a project and I'm going to make the book, you know, a part of that project. So that's kind of where the semicolon project came from. And I had this idea of the semicolon, which I think people actually didn't really know. I thought more people would kind of know the symbol, but it's not as kind of widely known as I thought. But I think it's such a powerful symbol in terms of mental health, because it's this idea of, you know, you could choose to give up. The author could choose to finish the sentence, but instead they put that semicolon there and they carry on. And I think this idea of, you know, I had this sort of analogy of the sentence being someone who's struggling with their mental health and someone who's really, you know, isolated and feeling lonely and really, really struggling. And the semicolon being this choice to carry on and this hope to carry on and push through. And so I sort of thought, I want to also create something that's like a central place for people to be able to go when they're feeling alone, not just because I knew that the book, you know, the book's an ongoing thing. It's not just an overnight thing. So I wanted something straight away that people could be able to go to. And I think it kind of came off the back of when I was struggling, I'd always think, you know, you can find books, you can find sort of things that make you feel a bit better, but you always have to search, you always have to go off in different directions. So I really wanted to sort of, I don't know, I had this idea of sort of making it a central place where all of these things could kind of be put together. So you wouldn't have to do, the last thing you want to be doing when you're struggling is trying to find things, you know, you just kind of want to click on something in it to be there. So I then worked on this website for months, and I wanted to include, you know, all these quotes and sort of things that I think really resonated with me. So I handpicked all the quotes and wanted to make sure that they really were like poignant to people. And then I put them all into different categories, and then I added sections with, so the website has sections of sort of how to help a friend who's struggling, how to help yourself if you're struggling, just little things that you can do, you know, reaching out, listening to music, taking up hobbies, just little ideas like that. And then also all the sort of support lines and helplines for multiple different sort of, because I know it's harder if you need specific things sometimes rather than just one sort of overall helpline or messenger. So I put on all the different things, and then sort of the story with the book. And the website also has become a place where stories for the book from. So the idea of the book is people have this choice to send in anonymous stories, or they can put their name, but I kind of wanted to have this idea. I think the idea of an anonymous person is quite powerful, because it could be anyone, and it could be any of us. And that's the point, that it could be any of us, and you never know. And I think there's this massive, you know, misconception with people who look really happy and who have these perfect lives, or who are sort of, you know, presenting themselves to be like in a really good position and really fine, are, you know, sometimes not fine. And, you know, it's not just the people who look sad who are sad. You know, you can look happy and still be struggling on the inside. And I think, you know, the people who often look the happiest and most put together are actually the ones who are struggling the most on the inside. And so I wanted to create this sort of central space in the book where people would send in their stories and their sort of their survival tales, really, with their mental health struggles and, you know, their experiences, and, you know, not just struggles, but, you know, ongoing struggles, not just past ones, you know, how people are sort of coping day to day. And I didn't want it to just be this sort of loads and loads of stories, because, you know, that's still reassuring, but I wanted more than that. I wanted to demonstrate, you know, that people can come out the other side, and I wanted them to be able to share some of what they learned from their experiences with other people. So there's sort of different sections. So there's the story one, which you then submit your story, and then there's, this is my favorite sort of part of the book, actually, it's reasons to stay alive. And I think it's the most beautiful thing ever. So people have submitted their personal reason, you know, things that they've, like special moments that they thought have been so worth living for, just such like precious things, like, you know, getting up early to go to the airport when you're going on holiday, or, you know, riding your bike with the wind blowing through your hair, just such things that I think when you're in a space of darkness and you're isolated and you're not able to see the light, you forget the little things, you forget the little moments in life that make it so worth it. And so I wanted to be able to have that for people who are struggling to read and see. And then I also there's also a section with advice you would give to someone else who's struggling, because I think there's so much power in someone who has struggled sharing something that they learned that actually helped with someone else. And so, you know, when the book, it's still an ongoing process because we're still getting stories, and obviously it's been tricky with meeting with editors and stuff with COVID, so I'm just kind of waiting to see when I've got meetings when the restrictions lift. But right now it's just, I've got about 70 stories so far, of just these tales of just absolute, it's just the raw emotion that people have shared. But you know, something that I think I was a bit worried about was, what if people just send in their stories and they're just really sad? And I think that was a big worry for me, because I was like, I don't want to create a book that's like people, that doesn't leave people feeling hopeful and, you know, inspired and like motivated and feel stronger. And I honestly, the stories are just incredible, people telling, you know, how they've struggled. But I don't think there has been one story that hasn't ended with, but I've learned how to do it, or I'm doing better now, or I still struggle but I'm getting better. And I think that's so important to realize that, you know, there are so many people who are struggling and who have struggled, but you can come out the other side, and you will come out the other side. And that's really what I wanted the book to be. And you know, I've also, we're sort of in the process of getting on writers on board, artists who are going to contribute. And yeah, no, it's really cool. And I don't know if you know Ben West, who's done a lot for sort of mental health campaigning. He's also getting involved with writing in the book. So yeah, no, I think it's just going to be, I want it to be a, you know, something that people can turn to when they're struggling, and they can read and know that they're not alone, and know that there's other people like them. I want it to be a symbol of hope, and a symbol, especially just for people who have not ever been able to start the conversation, because I think there's so many conversations within that book. You know, it's like having a conversation with people, because it's not, you know, it's not perfected stories, it's not edited, it's just raw, it's just how people are, it's everyday people, it's just people who have struggled. And that's the thing, I think we have to remember, that there are people all around us who are struggling, and that's what I want this book to demonstrate. And I want people to come away and think, yeah, you know what, it's okay, because there's other people like me, there's other people who have felt like I have, and to just, you know, instill in people that they're not alone, and that there is hope. And you know, there are so many things worth fighting for and worth pushing through and worth living for. And I think, you know, it's going to be something really powerful that I think a lot of young people especially need, because, you know, there's a lot of books out there, like self-help books and stuff, but just raw stories, I think there's so much power in unedited and just rawness coming from people. I don't even know if that's a word, rawness, but I'm making it a word if it's not. You know, from people who are just talking, and that's, you know, sometimes that's enough. Doesn't need to be perfected, it's just how it is, because life isn't perfect, stories aren't perfect. And I think that's really crucial, and that's what I wanted the book to be. I wanted it to just be real people talking about their real stories. And obviously, you know, it's a big thing, and I think this is what we have to remember, that it's not, people I think forget how common it is. And I want the book to be sort of a reminder of that. I want it to not only be a reminder to those who are struggling that they aren't alone, but also to people who might not necessarily struggle with their mental health, just how common it is around them. Because I think when you read things like that, it makes you look around you and think, God, if these people have struggled, maybe I should, you know, check on other people who I thought were fine. Because I think that's something that also we need to work on, just generally, just checking on the people who we think are fine and who we think are doing okay. And I really hope that book, sort of, the book provides that, and provides that sort of, I just want it to provoke people to, you know, different people. I think it has different intentions. The ones who are struggling to know that they're not alone and to push through, and to know that it's a symbol of hope. The ones who have never struggled to check on their friends and to maybe just educate themselves a bit more. And if one person comes away from reading that book more educated, or feeling a little bit better, or a little less alone, then, you know, that's good enough for me. That's fine. That means I've kind of done what I wanted to do.
I think it's an absolutely fantastic idea, and it's incredible that 70 people, 70 were willing to share their stories, bearing in mind the stigma surrounding mental health. I mean, it just shows that they were just craving to have their voices heard. And like you were saying, you can go for formulated and generalised books on how to achieve better mental health, and those do help. But having a book that is filled with individualised stories just makes it so much more personal.
I think the problem with some of these, I've gone through my fair share of self-help books, and I think some of them are amazing, like some of them are, really amazing books, but they are edited, they are perfected. And I think that it almost sort of alienates you from some of the experiences that are talked about. And when it's just, if someone's made a spelling mistake, I don't want to correct it. I don't want to, if they've made a mistake in their story, that's their story. I don't want to touch it. I want it to be their story, and I want it to be real and raw, because you don't have time to perfect your stories when you're speaking to someone in a conversation. If you stumble on your words or you say something wrong, you don't go back, you say it. And that's what I think is so important, because there's something that you can't get that from a perfected book. You can't get that same sense of, you know, just being so personal and so real and so deep with someone, to be able to share that side of things. And I think that's what I want. I want people to feel like they know these people. I want people to sort of understand their stories. And I think also giving people a platform who wanted to share their stories but didn't necessarily want to do it with their name attached, or but wanted to still spread awareness, was such a nice thing for me to know that I could provide that sort of outlet for people to share what they've been through and to be able to sort of tell their tales. And that's kind of what I wanted, even if it just provided someone who was writing that story a bit of comfort, knowing that they could get it off their chest, then that's enough, you know. And I think it's about the little changes, because little changes, you know, they all come together to make a big change.
And hopefully maybe eventually one day people won't feel like they have to remain anonymous. It should be something to be proud of, the fact that you are resilient. If everyone was doing what you're doing, imagine how far we would go. Inspiring, and I hopefully you're going to inspire other people to do the same. And if people are listening right now and thinking, oh, I really want to join in with this movement, what advice would you give people in terms of maybe as a young person campaigning, or even as a young person thinking, oh, I want to make some change? How can I ask my friends how they are? What small things can they do to try and make a difference?
Yeah, I think the key word here is small changes, because, you know, we'd all like to be, I'll just go and change the world, but it doesn't quite work like that. You know, we have to start with small things. It has to start with your friends. You know, if you're listening to this, just stop. You know, when you finish this, stop what you're doing and go and just ask your friend, how are you doing? And when they say fine, ask them again, but how are you really doing? Are you really fine? And I think it's asking twice, checking in more than once, you know, going back and say, oh, but you looked a bit upset today, are you really okay? Or, you know, I'm here, you know, you can talk to me. And just also checking on the people that you don't think need checking in on, because often they do need to be checked on. They do need you to go and ask how they are. And also I think it's really important to remember that just because someone carries it well, it doesn't mean it isn't heavy. You know, you have to remember that even if people look like they're fine, or they look like they're sort of dealing with things and they've got it all together, they might not have, because, you know, unlike physical illness, mental illness is so easy to hide behind a smile or an I'm fine. And I think you have to, something that I think is really important is changing it around and thinking, if this was like a cold, or if my friend had a headache, or if I had a headache and I, you know, what would you do? Because if you had a headache for 2 months on end, or even just 2 weeks, you wouldn't leave it. You wouldn't wait for it to get worse. You would go and you'd tell someone, you'd go and get help. And I think we have to learn to treat them just as equal, mental health and physical health, because they're both health. You know, there's no physical health without mental health, and there's no mental health without physical health. They're just as equal as each other. And I think you have to also remember that, you know, we talk about our physical health all the time. You know, there's no shame in going downstairs, you know, in the morning and saying, oh, I've really slept badly, I've got such a sore neck now, you know. But there's also, you know, that's because there's no stigma. That's because, you know, I find it so interesting the way that we as a society have sort of made these, you know, rules about things we can and can't talk about, because we do talk about physical health and we don't talk about mental health because we think that we shouldn't, but we should. And it shouldn't be something that we shy away from, because it's just as important as physical health. And talking about it, it's even more important, especially because of the fact that we've not talked about it for so long. So we need to get it out there. We need to start the conversation. So I would say stop, check on your friends, check on yourself, you know, check in with yourself. I think, you know, never forget about yourself, because you can't ever help anyone else if you're not helping yourself. And I think, you know, you have to check in, how are you really doing? And never leave things, never try and deal with things on your own. You know, a problem shared is a problem. Oh, that came out wrong. A problem shared is a problem halved, you know. And I think that's so important to remember, just talking to your friends. And even if you just go and say, like, I'm having a rubbish day, that in itself is a big thing, because we don't like to admit that. I think that people have this misconception that admitting that we're not okay is failure and it's like a weakness. But I actually think the people who admit that they're struggling and they're still getting on, and you still see them, you know, going about their day, or I think even just taking the strength to not go about your day and to not try and carry on is actually one of the bravest things you can do. And I think you have to remember that being strong isn't about covering things up and trying to be fine. Being strong is about admitting that you're not okay and getting the help that you need, and being strong enough to realize that you need to help yourself or you need to help someone else. That's what I think strength is. And I think that's so important to remember. And just to anyone listening, just check in on yourself, on your friends, And little changes, that's what we have to remember. You know, if someone does bring up the conversation, sit there and listen, share how you feel, share what you think. In a classroom, if you want to just start the conversation, just ask, so how's everyone doing mentally? How is everyone feeling? You know, like, just these little things. I know it sounds silly. Oh, how can that have a change? But it's a domino effect. These conversations are a domino effect. You start one and it leads to so many more. And the more people who talk about this and the more comfortable we become, the sooner we can make a change, because we are getting there. But, you know, I think we have to remember we've come from a place where mental health was not acknowledged or even talked about, like, at all. And so we still, even though we have made huge progress, we still have such a long way to go, but we can get there. And I know people think it's silly to think that we could, but we can make that change. We can be that change. We just have to come together to make it as one, rather than trying to sort of, you know, deal with things on our own. We have to come together. We have to talk to one another and, you know, see how we're doing and check in. And that's what's important. And, you know, if you want to do more than that, then, you know, research. You know, if your friend's struggling, educate yourself, work out what you can do to help. You know, talk about it with family, with teachers, see if you can do anything in your schools or, you know, your workplaces, wherever, to raise that awareness. And I think also just, you know, educating yourself is one of the most important things, because you can't, it puts you in a position to be able to help others, you know. And it also just, I think it's something that everyone should learn about, just to be able to learn about it for yourself, even if it's not to help others, but to help yourself, in case you ever do become, you know, in a position where you need to sort of take a step back and help yourself and work out what's going on. I think it's important to be educated and to be prepared, because I think mental health will affect us all at some point in our lives. You know, even if you're sitting there thinking, but I'm young, I'm fine, I've never been, you know, I'm just living my life. I think it's important to remember that it, you know, it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't stop at anyone. It will touch everyone at some point. And I think that's fine. I think we shouldn't be afraid of this, because these things, they make us stronger, they make us better people, they make us more able to take on challenges in the future. And I think that's something to remember, that, you know, I don't feel shame now compared to how I was. You know, if this was 3 years ago, I would have sat here and been mortified that I was admitting that I hadn't been okay, because I would have been like, but everyone thinks I'm so happy, and I am happy, and I am this crazy girl that people think I am, but I do struggle, and that's also okay. You know, I have had my struggles, I have been in bad places, but I'm also happy, and I'm also still living my life. And I want people to understand that admitting that you're not okay isn't going to change that. It's not going to change who you are as a person. In fact, it just makes you more able to live your life, because you're actually acknowledging things and dealing with them. And I think, you know, in regards to sort of what I've done, if you want to do more than that, then, you know, submitting your story, if you want to share your story to the Semicolon project, and, you know, be a part of changes like that. There's so many things, you know, you only have to take to Instagram or somewhere to find campaigns and other sort of projects that are going on. And that's how, you know, becoming involved with them, we can make such big changes. And I think that's something really important as well, to be able to sort of engage with other people, because if we all come together and help other people who are trying to sort of make these changes, we really can make that change quicker and make it so much more effective, and actually make it have so much more of a bigger impact, you know. So I guess that's what I'd say. I know that's long, but, you know, I think that's what it's about: checking in with yourself, checking in with others, and starting the conversation.
I love that. Check in with yourself, check in with others, and start the conversation. I think Boris has just found his next catchphrase for the coming mental health policy regime, because change is coming, and you've played such an important part in making that happen. An absolute honour having you on the show today, Savannah. You've been so inspiring. I feel like your passion has just passed through the screen onto me, and I'm so excited to see where this campaign goes, and also to hear from you very, very soon, whether or not that's talking to Boris Johnson, starting a new campaign, or even coming back on this show to hear about any more changes that you've been trying to make.
So nice. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm not stopping till changes are made. So fingers crossed that I'll be able to report back with some of these changes.